Hi, this is Maggie from Design Code Debug Repeat. Welcome to the channel. This video and the others in the Chapter 4 Problem Solving with Python playlist are an introduction to the concepts you will need to write programs with looping or repetition. This video accompanies Problem Solving with Python Chapter 4, but it's okay if you don't have the book. The videos stand alone as instruction on these topics. In the last video, we talked about using a loop to solve interesting problems like adding any number of values, finding the value that is the best fit for a property, such as the largest or smallest, and using a loop to obtain values until a particular value, called a sentinel value, is entered. In this video, we're going to talk about how to use loops to validate input. Let's dive in. I have open here in idle a script that you might like to type in so you can follow along with the video. This script simply obtains some input from the user. It obtains a password, which is a string, a temperature, which is a float, and an age, which is an int. Right now, the program does not validate any of these inputs, so the user could enter -1000 for the patient temperature, for example, and the program would move on, and if there were any processing in the program, process that value. Since we're just looking at how to validate inputs, there's no processing in this program. To validate inputs, we have to know what a valid range of values is. So I've included that information in the comments. This is something that you would learn from your client, for example, or from researching the problem. I've set up an arbitrary requirement for the password that it must be at least 8 characters. I've researched human body temperature and come up with an outside range of 65 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a little bit beyond what people would be able to survive, and I've given an age range of 1 to 130, since we're using integers for this. We'll assume there's no reason to measure ages below 1 for the purposes of this example. Let's begin with the integer patient age and validate that. To validate input, we need to be able to describe, with logic, the opposite of valid input. In other words, we need to be able to write a test for when our input is invalid. If our input is valid in the range of 1 to 130 inclusive, then invalid input is below 1 or above 130. If you need to review writing logic that will test for ranges, I'll include a link to that video here. The way we validate input with a loop is we obtain the input, like we're doing here, and then we write a loop, while and then the condition for when the input is invalid. And inside the loop, we obtain the input again. So for this input, we write while patient age is less than 1, or patient age greater than 130. That describes bad input, invalid input. It is the complement of the good input logic, which is patient age greater than or equal to 1 and patient age less than or equal to 130. And then inside the while loop, we can print a message if we like, letting the user know they've given us a bad value. So we can print the age must be between 1 and 130. And then we'll just copy our input statement and paste it in below that message inside the loop. It's good to let the user know why they're being prompted again. Otherwise, they'll be frustrated. Now let's examine this pattern. It's a loop with an initializer, test, and updater, where our input value is the loop control variable. We initialize when we get the input from the user. Then we test if the input is bad. If it is, we go into the loop. It's very important that within the loop, we give the user the opportunity to give us the input again. Otherwise, we have an infinite loop. And if the input was good, we simply bypass the loop entirely because the condition will evaluate to false if the input is good. Now we'll use the same pattern to validate the input for the temperature variable and the password variable. You might pause the video and see if you can write those two input validation loops yourself. Be sure to test them on values that are at the edge of invalid, that are invalid, and that are valid. I hope you tried to write those yourself. We're going to write them together now. Okay, so for patient temp. Let's do that one first because it's most similar to patient age. We're going to have the same loop structure again after we've obtained the value, while value is invalid, and then we'll print a message. Let's say patient temperature must be between 65 and 110. And then we obtain the temperature again inside the loop as our updater. What's the condition? Remember that our condition must describe invalid input, so less than 65 or more than 110. So while patient temp is less than 65 or patient temp is greater than 110. One thing I sometimes see students do is use the values on either side of the valid values. So for example, they might write while patient temp is less than or equal to 64 or patient temp greater than or equal to 111. You can do that with integers, but you can't do that with floats because 64.1, for example, is an invalid value. Take a look at this number line, which is not at all to scale. This image represents the test I wrote, while patient temp is less than 65 or patient temp is greater than 110. The open circles mean the value is not included in the test. We can see that 64.1 falls below 65, so it is included in the test. A temperature of 64.1, which is not allowed according to our specification, would be caught by this input validation loop. But if you write the loop entry condition as patient temp less than or equal to 64 or patient temp greater than or equal to 111, then you have something like what we see in this second representation. A solid circle means the value is included. And notice that 64.1, because it's larger than 64, is not caught by this test. I recommend getting in the habit of complementing the condition for valid input rather than writing a new condition that uses different values, even when you're working with integers. If you're shaky on complements, I'll include a link to a video on complementing logical expressions here. Now let's look at our final example, the password. This one requires that the password be at least 8 characters. You can get the length of a string using the len function. So in the console, if I type len, open parentheses, quote, hello, close quote, close parentheses, Python tells me 5. The len function counts all characters, so that includes spaces, punctuation, etc., not just letters. So to start, we'll just use the same pattern. After we obtain the input, we'll write while, and we can write len password less than 8, because that's the complement of len password greater than or equal to 8, which is our valid length, anything 8 or longer. And then inside we'll write our message, print the password must be at least 8 characters, and then I'll copy paste our input statement again. Let's run the program. To test it, I would need to run it several times, but let's give some bad values and then a good value for each prompt. So for the password, I'll give a value that's 7 characters. I'll just type 7 A's. And I get the message and the prompt again. Now, if you imagine this program running, you know that this second prompt is the one inside the loop. I'll type 8 A's now, right on the edge of what's allowed, and I get the next prompt, the one for patient temperature. That means that I made it out of the first input validation loop. For patient temperature, we know it must be between 65 and 110 degrees. Let's try 64.9. And we get the message and another prompt. Let's try 110.1. The message and another prompt, and let's give it a value right on the edge, 65. And we move past that input validation loop to the next prompt, asking us for the patient's age. This must be between 1 and 130, and it's an integer, so let's try 0, message and prompt. Let's try 131, message and prompt, and let's give it a value on the edge, 1. And the program ends. Let's run it one more time and give in-range values each time to demonstrate that we never enter the loops if we give valid values. So I'll type 8 A's, 98.6, and I'll type 21. Now, one thing you might be thinking is that this still won't validate if the user enters the wrong type of data. That's correct. This video accompanies Problem Solving with Python Chapter 4, and we do not cover checking for data type in this chapter. Checking for data type is obviously very important, but we need to make some assumptions to keep problems simple so we can focus on one thing at a time. And what we're focusing on here is writing an input validation loop. If you're interested in knowing how to check for correct data type, let me know, and I'll make a video about that for you. I'm going to end this video here, and I urge you to experiment with this. Try adding input validation to programs you've written previously. Devise a thorough set of test cases, and test your validation thoroughly. I've included an auto-graded exercise in the description of this video so you can practice with the video code. Once you've mastered the concepts here, you're ready to move on.